This week on Wisconsin Music Podcast, we have Alder Audio founder Tyler Campbell, and he's originally from Wisconsin. He's over in Michigan right now, but he is creating probably the most heavy-duty, great-sounding ribbon microphones that are on the small market at this time. So, Tyler, thank you so much for being on the Wisconsin Music Podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, telling the listeners, why don't you kind of give us your music origin story? How'd you get into music? How it got you into creating microphones, and just a little bit of information in your background.
Sure, yeah. So I like that your podcast is kind of Wisconsin centric, and so I'll give you a little bit more Wisconsin in my story there than maybe I otherwise would. So I'm from near the Appleton area. Went to Hortonville High School, and then went to UW-Madison for college. And I was just kind of always into music from a very young age. Always liked to sing and all that stuff. I was a band kid. I played trumpet, but I picked up guitar really early as well, in about 5th grade. And, just had a couple good music influences in my world. And some of those influences introduced me to recording. So there was a local group of dads that had a blues band they called The Leftovers. And they played at what used to be Frank's Pizza Palace in Appleton. And they would do these, just very occasional, gigs there. And as a middle schooler, that was the first time that I saw somebody play a blues guitar solo live, and it just kind of blew my mind. It got me all excited and things like that. And so, that got me deeper into guitar, and one of those guys wrote down the blues scales for me, and I was kind of off and running doing solos in my bedroom for hours at a time after that. But then the same crew also knew a little bit about recording. So I didn't even know, is it super complicated to record yourself? How hard is it to get into it? And they gave me a platform to kind of understand, just by kind of watching what they were up to, that this is doable. So I then really wanted to try to record. I got it's a Christmas present in high school, a Tascam DP01, which at the time, I don't know if you're maybe familiar with the unit, but it's kind of half crossover between, and there were 4-track tape, recording units in between that and fully digital. It was a digital unit that you could record on.
Okay.
And so I started on that and have kind of always been kind of a bedroom, home studio music guy ever since. Just always have enjoyed the idea of being able to record yourself. And then there's kind of a whole side story of that's my music background, but there's a whole kind of tinker background of different things that led me towards building microphones. But as far as music, that's the basic story.
Right. And that other side story, from what I remember, your dad had a manufacturing company that did certain parts for motorcycles, correct?
Yes, yeah, and that business is still around. It's in Neenah, and my brother runs it now. It's called Leather Pros, and they make bags, like saddle bags that go on the side of your motorcycle, mainly for Harley Davidsons. And so my dad started that company when I was in 5th grade. That's kind of its whole crazy story in and of itself. But I grew up in summertime, vacuum forming plastic molds and riveting parts, and just, have a lot of comfort in that type of environment, along with just the inspiration that you really can, with the right product in the right niche market, manufacture something still in the U.S. at a small company and have it be quite competitive if you do it right.
Right.
So, so I had that kind of inspiration in my background. And have taken on many tinkery music projects since then over time, and the ribbon mic one is kind of the one that stuck. So
cool. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those projects that kind of led up to the microphone. So what other things were you tinkering on that you felt wasn't quite the right thing that you wanted to do until you got to microphones?
Yeah, well, I started just as as a guitar player. I'm a guitar player and singer, and I do write music, just myself. I don't perform out or anything like that. But at the start, I just wanted to replace my guitar pickups. That was a good entry level into that type of thing. And so That was still all the way back in high school. And so my dad taught me to solder, and we took apart my Epiphone Les Paul and, put in the pickups that I had scoured the internet looking for, and that was just a very fascinating experience. That actually, I'll tell you, that was a fun story at the beginning, because the pickups I bought are by a guy named Bill Lawrence, who actually isn't around anymore. He was in his 70s at the time, and he worked for Fender and Gibson as a pickup designer. And he then created his own company, and they called it the International Mom and Pop Shop, Bill Lawrence Pickups. You can still find them, but they're like this very niche pickup brand.
Okay.
And I had called them with a question, and Bill Lawrence himself was the guy who answered the phone. So I was like 16 years old, and this guy talked to me for like an hour and a half online on the phone, talking about pickups. And it just, I've had a couple of those little stories that have really gotten me into it. So that was fun at 16 to talk to a pickup designer from Fender and Gibson, which was just totally unexpected. But I went from there to, I've tried projects over time that are a little bit more trying to put my spin on things. So one of the early things I did was I started rewiring guitars with all these crazy switching patterns, which I went first from what you might find commonly online, which is, series and parallel switching or out of phase switching with your various pickups. And so I started with that, and then I moved to doing some other stuff. I've probably rewired my common. I've got a Strat style guitar that I probably rewired like, I don't know, 7 times or something like that. And the last iteration was this crazy design with 5 single coil pickups and this kind of multi-rotary selector that the idea was to take 5 single coils and arrange them in such a way that you could get, a set of Strat tones, a set of Tele-like tones, and a set of Les Paul-like tones, all out of one guitar.
Wow.
And but the thing is, that's a very, very niche. There's no market for preloaded wired pick guards and things like that. So I'd caught maybe this was a thing, but it was clunky. It didn't sound good enough. It wasn't quite there.
Yeah, I hear you.
And so then I've done some projects that have worked, some that haven't. So I tried to get into acoustic guitar pickups, so I've built some of those, like your stick-on piezo type, and I've tinkered with those and never found something that I liked the sound of better than what you could buy on the market, so that didn't go quite anywhere. I also, at one point, really got into hand pans. Have you seen these? They call it the Han. I think the generic name they go by now is the hand pan, and it's kind of this rising instrument. It looks like a UFO, like a flying saucer, like it's a metal dome, kind of clamshell, domed on top, domed on the bottom, and it sounds it's the kind of a similar concept to a Jamaican steel drum. It's a singing metal instrument, but every note is actually 2 notes in harmony. So it has it's very difficult to tune them, because every note that they hit is kind of is really a chord. It's it's like 2 notes at once. And so I had tried to like build a whole jig and hammer out like those things. I actually made a pretty good dome, but I didn't have the skill for it. Like I just didn't get there in the end.
Yeah.
And so, but they say like the road to success is embracing lots of failure. So I had, lots of these projects that I always pursued to my own interest. And then I had gotten my hands on my very first ribbon mic, which was just this cheap Chinese thing. Had it for a while, didn't love how it sounded, but it kind of sounded different. And then I started reading online things that you can do to mod ribbon mics. And so I was like, I want to replace the actual aluminum foil inside of there. And then I wanted to wind my own transformer, which was quite a feat to try to figure out how to do that. Yeah. And it was not very long after that at all that I was like, I want to build one of these from scratch. So I called up my brother in Neenah at the shop they have there, and he's got a laser cutter. So like we worked together to draw up the very first one which was just this incredibly, like almost steampunk looking thrown together thing, but it worked, and it actually sounded quite good right off the first try. And so that's what started the ribbon mics. It was quite a road, but
right.
It just clicked,
And sometimes that's all it takes. It's just you gotta keep trying different things until all of a sudden, like you said, this is the thing that I want to really be passionate about, something that I really want to be a part of the creation of.
Yeah. Sometimes even amongst like artists and stuff like that, you talk about, I don't know, I even feel like there's some similarities with writing music where part of it is push, like songwriters will say, like just commit to writing a song a day and stuff. And I do think that that's good. But then there's also a side that's kind of muse. It's kind of like when you write a really good song, you don't feel like you wrote it. You kind of feel like you discovered it. And I feel like that there's kind of a duality to that. And it was definitely a duality with building this ribbon mic company, is that it was a lot of push over time to try to work and figure things out, but then when I landed on it, it was more like discovering something than designing something. Yeah.
So like how many failures did you have while you were creating your microphone till you got to where you are now with them?
Well, I mean, as far as straight up failures, not that many, because that first one worked.
Maybe not failures, but prototypes, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, many prototypes. And so, I do Alder full time now, and I make all the microphones myself still. So it's kind of the size of the thing. But when I was designing it, I was working a full-time job and designing microphones, and I probably went through, I don't know, at least 20 variations on the design in that first year. While I was still working. And it's like, how long is the ribbon? How fat is the ribbon? How do you hold the magnets? How do you wind the transformer? Like, there's just a lot of physical design that goes into how a microphone sounds, which to me is super fascinating. Like, it's one level of fascinating to learn plugins and mix things and be in a digital audio workstation where you can, intentionally raise the highs and the lows. But when you find out, like, I've narrowed the width of this one part inside of the microphone, and now it sounds different. And that's much more of like a geometric design and kind of nuanced craft. That just excites me. It feels more like, designing an acoustic guitar or something like that. And so I did a lot of that work with the ribbon mics, and I started with like Dremel cutting them out of like pipes, so I get like pipe stock from the hardware store, and the difficulty at the start was putting caps on them. Like I'd put a cap, I just used pipe caps, and then would drill through them and like put an XLR jack on a pipe cap. And then I had a big step of buying a 3D printer. And so then I could 3D print parts much faster and make the custom things. I taught myself CAD for the project, so I didn't know it before. Well, I'll tell you what, this is pretty far away from the content of your podcast, but it's kind of a universal thing too. I told myself I wanted to learn CAD for years, never did it, and then I needed to learn it in order to get something done, and then it was really easy. So I feel like that's almost like learning an instrument too. It's like, you could say, I really want to learn drum kit and not do it, and then have a song you're recording that you want to play drums on yourself or something like that. It's very motivating.
Right. And for listeners, CAD is kind of like the online, or not the online, but the visual create, like you create something in space, like you said, like the housing for a microphone or any kind of thing that you want to get 3D printed, where that's compared to in the music, it'd be kind of like our DAW, where we create different, samples or whatever, and we create mix songs and stuff. Yeah.
So I had to learn that, but I could dream up a shape in my head, draw it with the program, and then print it all in the same day. Like, it's amazing the tools they have these days.
Yeah,
like,
it's nuts.
You can design something so fast today that in the past you'd take months just to create the physical object. So that allowed me to go through a lot of ideas really fast with prototypes. And the big thing that allowed me to make them a lot faster was I put in a custom order at a laser cutter. So there's a special laser cutter that can cut tubes. So I got a batch of the actual tubes. That was the hardest part for me to create. And then I could just put the guts inside of the tubes, a lot faster and make those a lot faster. I should say that along the way, so I discovered things. The microphone does have a patent on it that has kind of officially come through now, which is really cool. And part of that patent came from the 3D printing story because ribbon microphones are really fragile. There's aluminum foil inside of them, and like you can break it just by blasting it with air. Like you never use a ribbon microphone in the port of a kick drum because there's so much air coming out that you can damage it. And through the 3D printing world, there's these special gears that you'd have to Google it and you'd immediately understand it, but they're called herringbone gears. And it's like a gear, but it's V-shaped all the way up, so it's like got an angle in the middle of it, but it's still a gear. It's kind of a wild thing. But I was the first one to ever corrugate a ribbon mic element with one of those gears, and it adds a lot of strength because now you have a bend in like two directions at the same time. And so I was able to get a patent on that as well as some other aspects of the ribbon mic. So it all kind of like just kept on building on itself. Like I got the 3D printer just to make design ideas, but then learning 3D printing taught me something else that then I could, tack on and actually use in the mic that was beneficial. So the whole time it had been kind of doors felt like that they were falling open as it was going, and it was sounding really good. It was getting really good feedback, and so I actually didn't start it thinking I really want to make a company out of this. Yeah. But there was a point that it got to where it was like, this kind of wants to be out in the world. It's unique, it sounds good, and so we decided to go for it.
Have you now that you've kind of gotten it down to a science about how you want these microphones made, have you gone back and put like a regular style ribbon in there to hear if it sounded any different than the herringbone style?
Yeah, well, to be honest, right from the start, I have. But right from the start, I was really hoping to get some kind of audio benefit from that different corrugation. I thought maybe there would be like different harmonic frequencies that, didn't resonate at the ribbon or something like that because it was corrugated differently. And I have detected no differences whatsoever. Which was a surprise to me because it's like the ribbon is physically like it doesn't bend as easily.
Yeah.
But I think what I've discovered with the microphones is that the motion of the ribbon inside the microphone is dominated by how heavy the ribbon is, like the mass of it, how thick it is, not necessarily like the springiness of the tension. Because I've got a whole I can do my own frequency sweeps now. I built my own setup to frequency sweep every single microphone that goes out the door. And people have asked that question. So I've done frequency sweeps of like regular corrugated ribbon, herringbone corrugated, and there's just like virtually no difference, which was quite surprising.
Right. But since it is that herringbone design, it is much stronger. And I've seen the video on your website where you kind of turn it upside down and let the head hit the tabletop. Yeah. And, and anybody who knows about ribbon mics, that's going to pretty much kill the mic if you drop it enough times, it's going to kill that ribbon real quick.
Yeah. 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 And so I tell people, there is still a fragile piece of aluminum in there, but I've been able to like measurably see that it takes drops better. It just stays more stable, which honestly for me, I just felt better about it because it's scary sending something fragile out there into the world as a business. And so for me, it just gave me the confidence that I wasn't going to be getting like a ton of returns or a ton of like, they get damage in shipping or something. I did lots of studies to find out. I've had some damage in shipping, and then I did a whole shipping study and found a way to ship them that is super stable. Like I can drop them from like 6 feet in the air, and then I unbox them and open it up, and like the ribbon's still fine. So
nice, very nice. Yeah, especially if people are when they want to go and order one from you, they knowing that it's that well packed that they feel that the money they're spending is hopefully they're not going to have to return it because someone dropped it and the ribbons got broken or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing with people in ribbons. They're kind of scared of them and stuff. So the other thing I've done, which, I guess it isn't really out there on the website, it's buried in the frequently asked questions page, but I'm trying to keep any repairs super low. So if anybody ever does 3 years down the line, their ribbon gets, like dropped off a truck or something like that, and they do really damage it and need a new ribbon, other companies, that's like $100 just to get the ribbon replaced. And so I right now do that for $20, and it's like, we're not making any money on that. We're probably losing some money on that, but it's like a subsidized thing as a service of support to the people who have the microphones out there, rather than trying to make any money on repairs.
Right.
To try to allay that fear.
Yes. Yeah. And for listeners, I have received 2 of these microphones from Tyler, and when I first plugged them in, they worked just fine. So there should be no worry at all about shipping these mics to you, because, like you said, they're packaged very, very well.
Yeah, I've looked into that.
And another thing about ribbons is that sometimes, for me at least, as an audio engineer on the side, is that some ribbon microphones need a boost. Like there's another company out there that has like the cloud lift for their microphones.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Does your microphone need something like that, or have you been thinking about creating such a outboard box to boost the signal of the ribbon microphone?
Yeah, so a lot of people like a booster on ribbons, and I'll say mine is like, it's not a terrible output by any means, but like amongst ribbon mics, like it's probably in the lower half of outputs. And so it's actually very close to the output of an SM58, like your common Shure microphone. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that if you're close up on it, so if you're going to put it like on a vocal like I'm using right now, or like up on an acoustic instrument, or you're on drums, you're not going to need any booster at all. But if you want to do it as like a room mic, which you can, and it'll sound good as a room mic on like softer sources, then you will probably want a booster with this mic. And the output is kind of like a nature of how it's designed. Like there's a trade-off with different things on how hot the output can be versus other design considerations. And so I designed it to sound the way I wanted to. And then, if people use it for like quiet and softer sources, some of those boosters do help. But I'll say the boosters are getting really good. They're cheap, they're clean. Like, you got some of the more popular brands like Cloudlifter kind of was the one who was out in the front, but then there's a different one called the Fethead that people like, and now they're getting really common where there's a number of other ones out there. And so it's just a good tool to have. The other thing with a mic booster, this is probably too technical, but it lets you dial in your preamp to where you want it instead of where you need it to be. Right. So if you want to dial your preamp down a little bit, and it gives you some clean gain to kind of just be more flexible. So it's always a good tool to have with pretty much any ribbon mic. It's always good to have any passive ribbon mic. So
yeah, and now for me, I have an outboard preamp which has an impedance dial on it. Now, how does impedance? Because there might be some listeners out there might be interested in how impedance affects a ribbon mic. So is there an easy way you can explain that?
Yeah, I'll give you the very short version because I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I did like a very long version of impedance and I put it on my YouTube channel. So I did like a 20-minute talk on it because I feel like it's sometimes very confusing online. But the very short version is that every microphone has like an output impedance number. And all you need to know is that if then whatever you plug the microphone into has an input impedance number. And some people get confused, like, well, do they need to match, or how does it affect things? Usually, you want the input number to be quite a bit bigger than your microphone output number. So like the output on the H44 here is 400 ohms. And so a rule of thumb is that, 5 or 10 times is always a good idea with your input impedance. And so, up to 4,000 ohms of an input impedance will kind of work well with the mic. Now, the thing is, you can go less than that. like if you've got preamps with selectable options, and what it'll do if you start to go less is it'll trim out a little bit of low end, and sometimes that's beneficial. And so with the H44, sometimes that's a little beneficial, even if people don't have quite that 5X or whatever. They might actually prefer it in an interface with a little less impedance.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe not quite as short as I would have liked, but if you want the long explanation, go to my YouTube channel.
Right.
Yeah.
But that works. And to follow up on that, one little thing is that you said as you turn the impedance down, it gets less low end on it. If you turn it up, is it going to increase the low end?
It's kind of like an asymptote, like as it's kind of like gets to a certain point and then it'll just like stay
there.
And so if you start turning it down, and it'll take a while to hear it, but you'll start to get a little less low end, but it might be a little tighter as well. And so it's kind of an interesting tool for audio engineers if you've got like a variable impedance on either a preamp, or some of the mic boosters that you just mentioned have a variable impedance on them.
Mm-hmm.
And the variable impedance can be like a cool tool for like dialing in a tight low end. You can kind of mess with that to get what you want out of it.
Excellent. Cool.
Yeah.
Now you also have two versions of this microphone.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you talk a little bit about the differences between the two?
Sure. Yeah. So the original design I just call the H44, but then that design has different sounds from the front and the back, which I'll get to in a second. But for some people, they really are wanting to use the mic more in a stereo situation. So either you have this technique mid-side where you kind of put it on the side and you're listening kind of like ears on the side, or they have something called Blumline, which is just kind of like, you put two microphones in like an XY pattern to record. And so if those are really high on your list, you may want a mic that sounds the same from both sides. And for those people, I created what I call the H44S for symmetrical. So the symmetrical mic is the same voice on both sides, which is also just about exactly the same as the backside of the original H44 design. And the reason I picked the backside was that the backside is kind of the more standard ribbon mic sound. They're not like hugely different from each other, the front and the back of the H44. But the backside is what people tend to use mostly on like drum recordings, guitar recordings, a lot of instrument recordings, things like that. The front side, there's some geometry differences to the capsule, or I suppose it's not a capsule, it's like a transducer. But it's really designed for vocals. And so there's some people that, would really like the versatility of like having it on vocals and other things. And then there's some people who would say, hey, I'm not going to use it on vocals, and I'd really prefer that, stereo recording flexibility. So that's, what's more important to you, versatility or, the symmetrical stereo response.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there like a different frequency response with the vocal side compared to the back side? Is it like a little bit brighter, or what's the difference between the two sides?
Yeah. Everybody asks that, and I have struggled over time to describe the difference. Like even my website description has changed a couple times over like I've written the product description differently, because I'll tell you, actually, when I measure the frequency response, we actually measure it in a controlled situation, which is like a certain distance from the speaker, so there's a lot of constraints in a standard frequency response measurement. They measure nearly identical in a frequency response, but they do sound different, very noticeably different to the ear. And so what I say is that the front with the vocal, it just has like a kind of a presence and a punch to it that I appreciate on vocals. Like by comparison, when I would use either the backside of the H44 or I would like shoot it out versus a standard ribbon mic, there's something about normal ribbon mics on vocals that can just sound kind of unexciting and dull. Like it doesn't pop like a vocal mic should. And I discovered this one thing in design that's kind of this little geometry kind of configuration where it just gives you that punchy edge to it. And it tends to work really well in closer proximity. So one other thing I use it for is like if I'm close miking an acoustic guitar, I might prefer the front side with that like kind of focus to it. The back side in comparison sounds like more natural and open. So that's my best description of it. but it's not like the difference between the front and the back side is like a dial that I turned. It's physical, the sound has to curve differently around the microphone, at the front versus the back. So it doesn't do just straightforward, predictable things. It sounds different in different situations, and it's something you kind of get to know as you use it.
So is it a different ribbon, or is it a different physical other part that makes it different?
It's different parts in the mic. Yeah. Okay. So there's kind of an additional, I won't get into the physics of sound, but like sound is fascinating. It bends all over the place and reflects and absorbs and stuff. And we're kind of like manipulating some of those forces so that the ribbon looks different to the sound from the front than the back.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. It's, I've always wanted to learn how to read schematics and do electronics. I just never got around to it yet. Hopefully, maybe in my later years, I'll do it when I'm retired or something like that. Because I always find it fascinating to be able to create things like this. It just never really had the priority or the time to do it yet.
You gotta have the right project. I'll tell you, I've got a guitar pedal sitting here that it's been sitting in my my office for like months, and I've never finished wiring it. There's a lot of people out there that'll build guitar pedals these days. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why the guitar pedal doesn't get me going. I love them. I love guitar pedals. But the mic is the project that grabbed me, and that one. Right. So I don't know. You can't account for these things. No. Things kind of grab you, and you gotta kind of sail on the wind when it's there. Exactly.
So those that are interested in learning more and contacting you, why don't you give them the information on where they can find these microphones?
Sure. So the best place is alderaudio.com. So it's ALDER, like the wood that Fender guitars are made out of, alderaudio.com. And I sell them all direct there. So I try to, price them really well because I sell them direct. In comparison, other US made microphones are like over $1,000 and mine's $400. I really wanted to put it in the home studio budget. So I've worked really hard to do that. And that's part of the whole direct sale thing. But then other places you can find me is just Alder Audio on Instagram. I do have a Facebook page. I'm not over there much, but if you want to send me a message on Facebook, you can find me under Alder Audio as well. And there's also a YouTube channel that's just Alder Audio. So it's a pretty unique name. So you Google it, you can find me pretty easily. Yeah.
Yep. And I'll put all that information in the show notes as well. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before I let you go?
No, I'm just happy to be here. Happy to spend some time. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tyler. It was a pleasure talking to you about your microphones. They sound fantastic. I sent you a couple clips of me playing saxophone on it, comparing it to a tube microphone, and I think it sounded much better than the tube microphone.
I really liked how it sounded. I was like, I always get a little worried when people do shootouts. I was like, oh, how's it gonna fare? And then I was like, yep, it did good. So
cool. All right, Tyler, thank you so much for being on, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks.